We're here this afternoon with Janice Wesley Kelsey, a former school principal and teacher, and now an educational consultant in the city of Birmingham. Janice, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
As we sit here on August 2nd, 2010, I look forward to our reflecting back on your life and your career in education. Let's start, Janice, at the very beginning. We know that the legal arguments in Brown versus Board of Education included the penultimate argument that separate is inherently unequal. Mm-hmm. But we know that much of the legal argument was based upon the reality of inequity in resources, in teaching, in all that would be available to a public school child. When you were a child in a segregated school system in Birmingham, was any of that apparent to you, or was your world a world that really didn't yet appreciate that?
I was so sheltered. I did not encounter people of a different race, so I certainly had no knowledge of what was going on in a different school setting. I just knew what I had, and I was very proud of what I had. A lot of school spirit, a lot of school pride in our community, in our church, in our school. That was my world. I had no reason to feel inferior or different about anything, because as far as I knew, all was well.
At what point, Janice, did you become aware of the issue of racial segregation in Birmingham and the civil rights movements coming to Birmingham?
Well, I would think, Bob, I was aware of segregation because, of course, when I went in public places, I saw the signs, colored white. I saw on the buses, colored only behind the wooden block, white only in front. And just as you were talking, I thought about an incident with my mother, who worked in the lunchroom at Woodlawn High School. It was an all-white school. This was before 1963, and a black student had attempted enrollment there. There was this huge riot outside, protest, I should say, and someone hung a black effigy out of the window of the library at Woodlawn. My mother took her apron off and walked home, and that was about a 10 or 12 mile walk. I knew then something was wrong, but my mother really didn't discuss with us what motivated her or what made her angry enough to take such a strong stand.
The story is well known that after the Albany movement, Reverend Shuttlesworth encouraged Dr. King to come to Birmingham and bring the movement to Birmingham. And that story clearly is the story of Birmingham becoming the center of the movement's efforts.
Right.
At what point did you become aware of that? And is there anyone in the movement who had particular influence in introducing the movement to students your age at that time?
Yes, I knew that there were mass meetings being held. I knew it had to do with civil rights. I did not know any specifics. But when I attended my first mass meeting at New Pilgrim Baptist Church, James Bevel was one of the presenters. And when he asked for the teenagers to meet with him in the church's annex, my eyes were opened.
Returning to the fundamental legal argument that resources in Southern schools were indeed inadequate and unequal, in what way did he illustrate to you how segregation was affecting you?
The first thing that he said that really got my attention, he asked how many electric typewriters did we have at my school? And I raised my hand confident to answer the question. And I said, we have one, but I get to type on it because I'm a good typist. And he said, you have one. Did you know at Phillips High School, they have 3 rooms of electric typewriters. They don't even practice on those things you have at Ullman. And I thought, wow, 3 rooms of them. Eye-opener. He continued, do any of you guys play football at Ullman? My brother was with me. He was on the football team. He asked, have you ever wondered why your helmets are blue and white when you get them, but your school colors are green and gray? And my brother's answer was, we always paint them the right colors. He said, yeah, but why do they come in blue and white? And we didn't know the answer. He said, it's because you get Ramsey's discards. When Ramsey gets new equipment, you get their old equipment. And I thought, now that's not fair. That was a turning point for me. He didn't just talk about my school as compared to white schools. He used other examples, but those 2 stood out in my mind because that was where I was attending school.
Janice, knowing that we're going to talk about your future career in education as a professional, could you tell us a bit about the story of books and other learning materials and what your first awareness was of the inadequacy of those resources?
Well, I was certainly aware of the inadequacy because, A, the state did not provide the resources. Our parents did. And so we were getting secondhand books and books that we wrapped with old newspapers and paper bags because they were torn and ragged. There were not adequate resources in the library. And I didn't know how inadequate that was until I got to look in a library at a white high school. It was unbelievable.
There's a popular perception in some discussions that we have about movement history and the legal arguments about the impact of segregation in public schools, that although students could now see this inadequacy, they couldn't think at the level that was necessary about the consequences of that inadequacy and the meaning of segregation. You and I have talked before, and I've talked to other movement veterans who say that that's a mythology, that at your age, once this was made aware to you, you were very capable of immediately understanding the consequences of Jim Crow.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I was able to understand. I remember another example that Bevel didn't cite it, but I became aware that at my high school, for example, art was an option. At a white school, during that same period of time, in art, they were taking a course called commercial art, preparing them for the world of work in art. That was never presented to me. Our vocational classes were primarily cosmetology, woodwork, carpentry. Those weren't the same kinds of occupational courses that were available in the white schools.
And obviously
they weren't preparing me for the highest level. And certainly I could see that.
Let's talk a bit about Dr. Bevel personally. Okay. It's very obvious that Bevel's decision to focus on youth and to begin to give you a reason to become personally involved in the movement was controversial, to some extent at least. Yet we know the Children's Crusade ends up being a turning point in the movement. At the point Bevel sought your involvement, what was the impact of his request and what was the level of excitement among the students that you should participate in the movement?
The excitement was beyond anything I can describe to you. There was so much more out there that we were not aware of. And I did not know at the time that there was controversy among the leaders about our involvement. But once Bevel set those examples out, it was over. We knew we were mistreated.
As a high school student, you were ready.
I was totally
There was a
ready.
personal conviction,
Absolutely.
a personal resolve. Let's talk a bit about your mother's decision. Courageous, inspiring. To look back on it, almost more inspiring now than then.
Absolutely.
Part of Reverend Bevel's concern was that if more parents like your mother participated in the movement actively and in the long term, they would lose their jobs.
Absolutely true.
But if their children filled the jails, if their children put pressure on the city of Birmingham, the parents' job and the economic stability of the family could be preserved while political pressure was put on the city of Birmingham.
He absolutely stated that. Not in those terms. What I remember him saying is that your parents can't. You want to do something about it, you can. Your parents can't. If your parents get out here and protest, they're going to jail. If they go to jail, they're going to lose their jobs. There's nobody to take care of you. But you don't have anything to lose. You're getting a second-class education. That rang in my mind, a second-class education. No, I want better. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get better.
When the Children's Crusade began, describe the dynamic of it and give us in your first-person account that vision of something that our students can't relive, but can hear about through your first-person account.
Leading up to our big day, I had attended some student nonviolent workshops. We learned freedom songs. We saw some film strips of sit-ins and saw some of the brutality associated with it. We were encouraged over and over again to remain nonviolent. If someone calls you a name, if somebody hits you, spit on you or whatever, cover your head, say a prayer, sing a song. You cannot retaliate. You got to be strong. You got to be nonviolent to participate.
So you were schooled
Oh, yeah.
in the original training
Oh, yes.
of the Lawson workshops in Nashville that empowered the Nashville sit-in movement.
Yes. We saw some of that documentation. And none of that frightened me. None of that frightened me. It served more as a motivation. I want to be involved. And I think the more we sang those songs and rehearsed what we would do, the more committed I was to getting this done. On May the 2nd, 1963, when I woke up, I was filled with excitement. I was singing those freedom songs. I'm clapping. I'm packing my purse, toothpaste, toothbrush, deodorant, all the things I thought I would need for an overnight stay in jail.
So Reverend Bevel had made it clear to you
Oh, yeah, you're going to
that
jail.
if you began
Yeah.
that first march, you were likely to be arrested.
You're going to jail. Yeah, he said it. So prepare yourself. It may be cold inside. Bring a jacket or a sweater. Take what you need to take care of yourself for a few days. You're going to jail if you participate. Going to jail didn't frighten me one bit. I was going to get my freedom. And that's what we were saying. And there's one song we sang, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. That was me. It was just all over me.
This was about an awareness that you had a stake at your age
Yeah.
in the inequity of public education.
Oh, absolutely.
That it was affecting your learning,
Yeah.
your career path, and the whole notion of public education's connection
and
with citizenship.
equal opportunity, equal access. And why were some of the kids being given this and some of them were not? So the fight was about equal access. And when I finally realized, okay, I had been denied that, I wanted to do everything possible to correct that. So if it meant going to jail is what I wanted to do.
How did the teachers react, and how did this influence the relationship between the children in the Children's Crusade and the teachers who were sympathetic to the entire movement's cause and themselves
Right.
very supportive in head and heart about what you were doing, but who had to
Right.
walk, I suppose, a very fine line.
Absolutely. I remember one teacher, she was a new teacher who later became a principal in our system. But I spoke to her that morning when I got to school and asked her, suppose some kids walk out of your class today, are they going to fail? And she said, if everybody walks, it's nobody to fail.
Was there a feeling that the teachers became bonded with you in a whole different way and at a whole other
I think
level?
so. I believe that. I believe they were supportive of what we were doing, but could not say, I support you, go ahead. You know, they had to protect their jobs, but they weren't doing anything to stop us. And for me, that meant they were with us.
Now, you did get stopped. That first march was
Yes.
met by law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And this was your first encounter at a very young age, 16 or 17, with the legal system.
Absolutely.
Describe that event.
Well, we were marching and singing, "We Shall Overcome." We were hand in hand, marching in pairs. And this white police officer, carrying a megaphone, speaking through a megaphone, said, "You're in violation of a city ordinance. Get out of this line, nothing's going to happen. Stay in this line, you're going to jail." Personally, I was intimidated by that. I was not accustomed to disobeying adults, period. A white man, I'd never encountered anything like that. And this white man had a gun on his hip and a stick in his hand. Very intimidating. Somebody started singing, "We Are Not Afraid." That gave me enough courage to keep on singing as loud as I could and marching on up into that paddy wagon, going to jail.
But all the time being totally consistent with the guarantees of the First Amendment. Totally nonviolent, the whole
Right.
march,
Right.
totally peaceful,
Totally.
totally committed
Yes.
to simply challenging the issue that was at stake.
Absolutely.
Describe the experience of walking into a jail cell.
That was a bit more intimidating. When we finally got downtown to the county jail, they took our personal items from us. They made fingerprints, took mug shots. We went upstairs. We were escorted upstairs and put in this long corridor of jail cells. The closing of that door behind them was intimidating.
So your first recollection of the criminal justice system was stark and now a bit frightening.
A bit frightening, it was. I wasn't afraid of what somebody was going to do to me, but it was just an intimidating atmosphere. I remember it being cold in there, concrete floors, a couple of double-deck beds with no mattress, no protective covering around the commode. That was so different than anything I had experienced. So that was a bit much to take in initially. But it didn't take long before there were so many of us there until we comforted each other by singing and clapping and talking to each other about going to get our freedom.
Now, Janice, I know that you never ended up before the court.
Right.
What's your recollection, if any, about how the judicial process dealt with the students in the Children's Crusade?
What I remember is that we were expelled from school and that there was a minister, Bishop Calvin Woods, who also had 3 daughters who had participated in the protest. And he, backed by the SCLC, went to, I don't know if it was a circuit court in Atlanta, and filed an injunction against the Birmingham Board of Education. We were reinstated without cause, without punishment. And I never had to go to court. They told us that our records would be expunged. To my knowledge, that did not happen.
But the purpose of that lawsuit, we know from our history that Calvin Woods was asked to participate in that litigation and did consent to his daughters being the nominal plaintiffs in that case. That case was filed for the purpose of reinstatement of the students who had been expelled solely for their participation in the movement. Now let's take you simultaneously as you see the legal system side operating simultaneously to your continued personal witnessing of the violence of Southern resistance. From your position in jail, I think, for the first time, you saw the first images of Bull Connor's response to the demonstrations in Kelly Ingram Park. Describe that for us from your perspective.
From the county jail, it overlooks toward the park. And it seemed like Bedlam from where I was looking. I had a brother who was out there who described what it felt like initially when the water hoses were brought to disperse the crowds. Well, it was hot outside, and they were acting like they were taking a shower, just enjoying the water. And Bull Connor, I guess, was incensed by this and gave an order to turn the water on full force. People were pushed against buildings, down the sidewalks, hair. One girl had some of her hair sheared off her head. Skin was broken, blouses torn. And also going on in the park, there were dogs, German Shepherd dogs, that were attacking the kids, the demonstrators.
Looking back at the phenomenon of this part of the Birmingham movement, a part of mass protest that becomes extremely significant in history. Some historians say the Children's Crusade was considered the pinnacle event in the success of the Birmingham movement. How do you see it now, reflecting on it all these years later?
Looking back, I would agree. There had been arrests prior to the Children's March. So I think it was when the children came out in such large numbers that overwhelmed the system. It was beyond what city officials had ever imagined. I think even beyond what our civil rights leaders had imagined.
I have the feeling that your mother was very supportive and felt that you were as inspirational to her as she had been to you.
Oh, I learned that later. I didn't know that at the time. Because the day that I walked out the house, headed to participate in the movement, she cautioned me. I'm sending you to school. Don't go anywhere and get yourself in any trouble. I don't have any money to get you out. I said, yes, ma'am. I really was going to school. I just wasn't going to stay. And I think in her mind and heart, she feared what might happen, and she didn't want me hurt. But I think in reflecting back, looking back, I think she was very proud of the fact that she had children who stood up for their rights, even if it meant going to jail. She was always one helping people register to vote, to sign petitions, to get the streets paved. She was doing civic-minded things, but I didn't view it as my mama is civic-minded. You know, she was just being herself. But knowing that and looking back, she would have been a part of that.
Janice, we can't have this conversation without one painful recollection above all. I know you were close to 3 of the girls who were killed in the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church. And it's important to remember that part of history also. If you can, share your thoughts with us.
September 15th, 1963, 10 something in the morning, I was in church, and our pastor announced that 16th Street Baptist Church had been bombed. I thought it odd that someone would bomb a church on a Sunday because they knew people would be there. I was aware that it was Youth Day at 16th Street. As the day wore on, church was out, our phone rang, started ringing, people calling our house asking if someone in our family had been killed. My last name was Wesley. There were 9 of us. Everybody at my high school with the last name Wesley was my sibling, except for Cynthia Wesley. I knew Cynthia because she had been adopted, and her adopted mother and my mother's sister were friends. And when she came into their family, they kind of brought me on as her big sister. People thought that it was me who had been killed in that bombing because I had demonstrated and gone to jail. Cynthia had not. She was in the 9th grade. I knew her very well, and I had not known of anybody in my age group to even die, let alone be killed. Even today, it brings on a very strong emotional feeling because I remember it as though it happened yesterday. I thought it was such a terrible thing for those girls to lose their lives in church, having never participated in a demonstration, and I just couldn't imagine that level of hate that someone would have to do something like that. And it's painful to me today to think on it and talk on it.
Janice, let me take you now to your career as a teacher. At the point that you enter your career, the federal courts are becoming increasingly concerned about whether true schools, not black schools and white schools, but just schools, will exist, and how we will solve the issue of public school desegregation. In U.S. versus Jefferson County, the most famous of those opinions, Judge Wisdom writes for the court about the fear of white flight, the fear of white teachers retiring rather than teach black students, the incredible pressure that will be put upon black teachers to be spread out among white schools, and the possibility, if not probability, of the introduction of private schooling as an avoidance of public school desegregation. You really saw both sides of this judicial image of what the legacy of Brown might be. Describe your first experience in a predominantly black school as a teacher, and then how that evolves into your personal experience with a different school.
My first year, I taught at a very large African American school. It was situated in the middle of the largest housing project we had at the time. I taught science, 7th and 8th grade science. My class sizes ranged from 39 to 41 kids. There were so many children, they couldn't all come to science every day. They alternated. Some classes came Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Some came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There were no supplies. I would go to my college that I graduated from, it's local, to get test tubes and petri dishes and microscopes because there was nothing to demonstrate. There was nothing there to demonstrate. There were not enough textbooks, so students could use the books in the classroom, but they could not take them home overnight. The next year, I was selected to transfer to an all-white school. it was a middle class neighborhood. The director of human resources lived in that neighborhood. In fact, she had 2 children in my classes. A former mayor lived in that neighborhood. It was a very nice middle class community. And I was surprised to find I had 4 classes. They came in the morning for instruction and in the afternoon for enrichment. The class size was 26 to 28 kids. Of course, there were plenty of books. I had a science lab. I was told if there's anything you need that's not here, just let us know. We can have it. It was like night and day. In the same system, there was a great concern because the disparity was so wide. And having fought for equal access and then to live in a position where it was obviously so different, that left me in an ambiguous state. How do I enjoy all of this that I have to use now, and I know what's happening across town?
And then you became a school administrator and have been able to see 2 public schools in the large sense, in the big picture sense, as a school principal, and now are a consultant in education. In your consulting practice, what issues or situations do you work with most frequently, and has your consulting practice focused your concern or your work in any particular area of public education?
I have consulted mostly with situations involving children at risk of failure, in helping to structure or format programming materials to help high-risk students. And those are kids who are at risk of dropping out or failing. I've worked with some after-school programs with this No Child Left Behind and getting some tutorials together. I've worked some with mentoring new principals and trying to help them with staff selections and evaluations and things of that nature.
We've been to Kelly Ingram Park with our students on many occasions, and you've even lectured to our students at Kelly Ingram Park. How does it feel walking through Kelly Ingram Park today?
I have a mixed emotional feeling about it. It makes me remember May 2nd, 1963, and the bedlam that I saw and felt. But it makes me proud that I had a little part in changing that history that I had lived.